I'd been driving up through the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains for most of the day. It was late summer and hot, but the air cooled off quickly the higher I got. I'd been on Highway 395 since the morning, headed north, no real destination in mind. Just needed a break from everything: work, noise, people. I had my camping gear in the back of the truck and figured I'd find a place to pull off for the night. Nothing fancy, just some peace and quiet, maybe a fire, a decent view, and a solid night's sleep in the woods. Around 5:30 or 6, I noticed a small brown sign with a faded tent symbol and an arrow pointing west. No name, no distance, just a plain sign that probably hadn't been replaced in 30 years. Figured I'd give it a shot. I had enough daylight left, and I didn't want to waste time driving around in the dark looking for a spot. I turned off the 395 and followed a winding dirt road. It was rough, uneven, narrow in spots. Tall pines and thick undergrowth lined both sides. The road kept twisting, and I started to lose track of how far I'd gone. Had to be at least 3 or 4 miles in. Then the trees opened up a bit, and I saw a clearing, flat ground, a few old wooden picnic tables, a rusted-out fire ring, and a half-fallen sign that said Dry Creek Campground. No creek in sight. Didn't look like it had been maintained in years. The place was completely empty except for one vehicle, an old, pale blue sedan, maybe from the early 90s. It sat in the far end of the loop, tucked back under some trees. One tire was low, and the paint had that sun-faded look like it had been sitting out here a while. Windows up, no sign of movement, no plates on the front. I slowed down, drove the loop once just to get the layout, and parked about 2 sites away from the sedan. Figured if someone was sleeping in it or just left it there, they probably didn't want to be bothered. I set up camp fast. Just a simple tent, sleeping bag, cooler, and my folding chair. I had my hatchet with me and chopped some dead branches for a fire. The woods were dead quiet. No wind, no birds, no bugs. That kind of silence that makes your ears ring. There was something a little off about it, but I figured maybe it was just the altitude messing with me. I got the fire going and cracked a beer. That's when I noticed the dog. It was standing about 30 feet away from me, just beyond the edge of the site where the trees started again. Medium-sized, short dark coat, maybe some kind of mix. Looked half wild. Not thin, but not well kept either. It stood still, head low, ears perked, eyes locked on me. Not growling, not moving, just watching. I sat there for a minute, not sure what to make of it. I've been around dogs all my life, but this one didn't give off any friendly vibes. No wagging tail, no curiosity. Just locked in like it was waiting for something. I tried ignoring it, kept sipping my beer, but it didn't budge. After a while, I stood up and took a step toward the fire ring. I moved fast, not aggressive but enough to show I wasn't scared. Just wanted it to back off. That's when it started barking loud, sharp, fast. No rhythm to it, just barking non-stop, like it had finally been given permission to let loose. It didn't run away, just stood there barking its head off. That's when I heard voices. They came from deeper in the woods, back the way the dog was facing. 2 male voices, low and rough, not yelling, but close enough I could make out the tone. I couldn't tell what they were saying at first. Then one voice got clearer. It wasn't close, maybe 50 yards off, but the words carried just enough. "Oh, we're gonna have some fun tonight." Just like that. No laughing, no shouting. Just that sentence. Then silence. I didn't freeze or think. I moved. I threw my cooler into the truck bed, grabbed my sleeping bag with one hand and the tent with the other. Didn't bother rolling or folding anything. Just stuffed it all in. I left the fire going. Left my folding chair. Didn't even put the tailgate up. I jumped in, started the truck, and threw it into reverse. I didn't look back at the dog. Didn't check the sedan. I backed onto the loop road, swung the wheel, and floored it. Gravel kicked up and the tires slipped a bit on the first turn, but I kept the wheel straight and my foot down. That narrow road that felt long on the way and felt like a death trap on the way out. Every twist felt tighter. The sun was almost gone, and the trees on both sides looked darker by the second. I drove like hell, every nerve buzzing. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights or someone running down the road behind me. Nothing, just trees and dust. I didn't stop until I hit the 395 again. I pulled over onto the shoulder, heart pounding. Got out, checked the back. Everything was still there, more or less. My tent poles were bent, and I'd crushed a can of beans under my sleeping bag. I stood there for a few minutes, just breathing, hands on my knees. There were no other cars in sight, just the highway stretching north and south. The sun was gone now, just that last red stripe on the edge of the sky. I didn't feel safe, but I didn't feel watched anymore either. I drove another hour north that night, found a small roadside motel, and paid cash for a room. I didn't sleep much, kept thinking about that voice in the woods, the way the dog stared, the empty campground with that one old car, and the silence that felt too deep. I looked up Dry Creek Campground the next day on my phone. Nothing came up. No listing on any map, no reviews, no trail notes. Like it didn't officially exist anymore. Just an old remnant, forgotten but still there. I don't know what those men were doing out there. Don't know if they were squatting, hiding out, or worse. All I know is I got out in time. And that dog wasn't a stray. It was a warning. I never go off down unmarked roads anymore. I stick to campgrounds with signs, fees, families, and other cars. Places where someone would notice if you disappeared. Because that night in the Sierras, someone noticed me. And I don't think they were planning to leave me alone. That voice I heard, calm, certain, and quiet, still gets under my skin. Not because it was loud or aggressive, but because it was so sure. And that's why I left everything behind and didn't look back. I'll never know what they had planned, but I knew enough. I've been camping all my life. I've been through bear encounters, storms, rockfalls, and sprained ankles miles from help. But nothing made me move faster than that sentence. Sometimes the woods are just woods, and sometimes they're not. And when a dog shows up out of nowhere and starts barking like it's on command, it's time to go. No second thoughts. Because whatever those guys wanted to do that night, they weren't there for the trees or the stars. They were waiting, and I wasn't about to stay and find out what for. I'd been out camping for a couple of days in a spot I'd used before, way off the main road in a national forest in the western part of the state. I'd parked my truck at the end of an unmarked service road, hiked in about 1.5 miles, and set up camp in a small clearing near a dry creek bed. I had a good tent, some food, a decent sleeping pad, and plenty of water. Nothing too fancy, just the basics. I'd brought my 20 gauge with me because it was bird season, and I figured I'd get some hiking in while maybe flushing out a few upland birds. The woods were quiet for the most part. Temperatures dropped hard at night, but the days were still warm enough to get by in just a shirt and vest. I'd seen a few other hunters in the distance on day one, but nothing close. Everyone kept to themselves, and I was fine with that. I came out here to get away, stretch my legs, and enjoy some quiet, not chat with people. On the third morning, I decided to take a longer route than usual. I'd marked a stretch of ridgeline on my map that I thought might be good for birds, but the quickest way to get there was to drop down through a shallow valley and cut across before hiking back up the other side. I left camp just after first light, shotgun slung over my shoulder, backpack light, a thermos of coffee in hand. The hike was calm and uneventful. I saw a few doves fly off early on, flushed one covey of quail that I missed clean. I wasn't too concerned with hitting anything. Just being out there with the smell of pine and dirt was enough. The valley was the only part one wasn't familiar with. I'd looked it over on the map the night before, and it didn't look like anything special. Just some uneven ground and thick underbrush. No real trails marked, but there were usually faint game trails to follow if you kept your eyes open. When I got down into it, the trees got thicker, and the light started to fade a little, even though it was still early in the day. The floor was soft and scattered with fallen branches and dry leaves. Every few hundred feet, I'd see broken pieces of old fence or rotting posts, signs that someone had tried to use the land a long time ago, maybe to graze cattle or mark property lines. Now it was just overgrown forest again. About 30 minutes in, I started to hear a faint noise ahead, hard to describe. Not animals, not wind, just a slight shuffling. At first, I figured it might be a deer or maybe a bear moving through, so I slowed down, stepped more carefully, and stayed alert. The trees thinned out a bit around a bend, and I came up on what looked like a crude trail. Not a well-used hiking path, just a narrow strip where the ground was more worn than the rest. I followed it for a few yards, and that's when I saw the guy. He was standing right in the middle of the trail, dead still, holding what was unmistakably an AR-15. It was pointed down but ready, slung forward on a 2-point sling across his chest, his hands resting on it like he was ready to raise it without much effort. He hadn't heard me yet, or maybe he had and was pretending not to. The moment I laid eyes on him, every instinct I had screamed at me. Not just nerves, something deeper. The kind of feeling you only get when you realize you're in a bad place at the wrong time. The guy looked rough. Not like a hunter, not even like someone camping legally. His clothes were stained and dirty, a mix of old army surplus pants and a filthy windbreaker. He had a grizzled beard and long, matted hair. His eyes looked sunken in, and his face was tight, like he hadn't eaten well in weeks. I stopped where I was, maybe 25 yards back, and stayed calm. I didn't raise my voice or make any sudden moves. I just wanted to be clear I wasn't a threat. I lifted my offhand slightly and said something like, "Just out looking for birds." He didn't move at first. Then he turned his head just enough to glance at me. No expression, just this long pause, eyes still on me, and then, eventually, he muttered something about hunting deer. His voice was low, gravelly, unfriendly. Right away, a few things clicked in my head. 1, deer season wasn't open. 2, even if it was, nobody hunts deer with an AR-15 in this state. 3, he wasn't wearing orange, wasn't dressed for it, and he sure as hell didn't look like he had any tags or plans to hunt anything legally. He looked like he'd been living out there. He looked desperate. I tried to play it cool, nodded a bit, and asked him if he knew a better way to find upland birds in the area. Just something to shift the conversation, try to keep things moving. That's when his voice changed, sharper. He said, "Well, I imagine you might find some back the way you came." The way he emphasized that stuck with me. Not sarcastic, not joking, just flat, like a warning or a command. I didn't argue. I didn't press for details. I just nodded and slowly turned, walked back the way I came. Didn't rush, didn't run, just moved with purpose and calm like it was nothing. But the entire time, my back itched like I had a target painted on it. I walked for probably a quarter mile before I finally glanced back. No sign of him, no footsteps, no sound, nothing. It was like he melted into the trees. Still, I didn't stop. I took the long way around the valley, stayed up on the ridge where I could see everything below, and eventually made it back to my camp a couple hours later, exhausted. I sat on a rock for a long time, just staring at the fire pit, shotgun across my lap. I didn't eat much that night. I didn't sleep much either. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves outside the tent had me sitting up, eyes open, listening. The next morning, I packed everything as fast as I could. I didn't even eat breakfast. Threw it all in the truck and drove straight into town. First thing I did was head to the county sheriff's office. I didn't dial 911. I didn't think it was an emergency anymore, but I felt it was worth reporting. I sat in a little room with one of the deputies and explained the whole thing. Where I was, what I saw, what the guy looked like, how he acted, how he had the rifle, and how wrong everything about it felt. The deputy wrote it all down, didn't say much. Asked me to point the location out on a map. I did. He nodded and said they'd check it out. That was it. I don't know if anything ever came of it. I checked the local news for a few weeks after, no stories, no arrests, no incidents. Maybe they never found him. Maybe he moved on. Maybe it was just another one of those backwoods guys who doesn't want to be found and knows how to stay hidden. But I know what I saw. That man wasn't out there for deer. And he wasn't out there just trying to survive either. He was guarding something. Maybe it was a grow site, maybe it was drugs, maybe it was something else entirely. But whatever it was, I was too close to it, and I knew it. He knew it too. I still camp. I still hike. But I don't go alone anymore. And I don't stray too far off trails that I know well. I stick to legal spots, places where I can call for help if I need it. Because out there, no one's watching. And not everyone you meet wants to be left alone. Some people are out there waiting, and you won't know until you're standing 20 yards from them with nowhere to go. It's a big country, and not all of it is empty. Some parts have things you don't want to find. And if you do, you just pray they let you walk away. I went on a solo camping trip last fall, somewhere in the northern part of the state. I needed a break. Life had been piling up. Deadlines, phone calls, all the little things that stack until they feel like they're crushing you. I'd always loved the outdoors, and there was this old forest area I'd bookmarked years ago, the kind of place that's not listed on the glossy camping websites. Just state-owned land, accessible if you know where to park and walk. I drove up on a Friday morning, took my time getting there. The air was cold but clean. Trees were already dropping their leaves, and that crackle underfoot made it feel like I was further from civilization than I really was. I parked at a little pull-off near a washed-out trailhead. From there, I hiked about 2 hours into the woods until I found a spot that felt right. It was flat, had enough dry ground for a fire, and there was a little creek nearby I could use for water. I set up my tent and unpacked slowly. I wasn't in a rush. I made a small fire ring with some rocks, set out my tarp and gear, and boiled some water for tea. There was no one around, no sounds but birds and wind. Felt like exactly what I needed. That first night was quiet. I sat by the fire until it got dark, ate some noodles, then climbed into my sleeping bag and drifted off listening to the wind in the trees. The second day, I hiked around the area, not straying too far but enough to get familiar with the surroundings. There were no signs of other people, no old fire pits, no garbage, no boot prints. It made me feel good, like I had the whole place to myself. I collected some firewood, gathered water, and spent the afternoon whittling a stick down just to have something to do with my hands. That night, it got colder. I wrapped up in layers and kept the fire going longer. Around midnight, I heard something out in the trees. Just a crack of a branch, probably a deer or a raccoon. Normal sounds, but I kept listening, not in a paranoid way, just curious. A few more steps, then quiet. Eventually, I went to sleep, figuring it was just wildlife passing through. The third day was when it started to feel off. I went for a longer hike, maybe 4 or 5 miles from camp, and when I got back, something looked different. My tarp had shifted slightly, not blown around, just touched. I had left it stretched taut with rocks at each corner, and one corner had been moved, like someone lifted it and set it back. Nothing else looked disturbed. My gear was all there, food still tied up in a bag from a tree. But that one thing had changed. I tried not to make too much of it. Wind can do weird things. Animals can be curious. I reminded myself of that and tried to focus on starting dinner. That night, I didn't stay by the fire as long. I felt exposed. The woods, which had felt peaceful before, now seemed full of hiding places. Every crackle made me glance over my shoulder, but nothing happened. I went to bed early. I woke up in the dark to the sound of something moving outside the tent. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't the kind of quick, scurrying movement you get from raccoons or squirrels. It was slow, deliberate, like a person trying not to be heard. I held my breath and listened. A soft crunch on leaves, then silence, then another crunch. I didn't move. I stayed as still as I could in the sleeping bag, heart pounding. I kept thinking, what do I do if they unzip the tent? I didn't have a gun, just a pocket knife and a hatchet, and both were outside near the fire pit. I didn't even have my flashlight in the tent. It was hanging from a tree hook above the food bag. I waited, barely breathing. The steps came closer. Then they stopped. I couldn't see anything without opening the flap. I thought I saw a shadow once, a shape moving just beyond the thin nylon wall, but it could have been my eyes playing tricks. Then, nothing. Minutes passed. Then an hour. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I opened the tent and looked around. Nothing was missing, but there were faint footprints in the soft earth near the fire ring. Boots, adult-sized, not mine. I checked the tarp again. It had been moved, slightly repositioned like before. Still no signs of aggression, no destruction, but it was clear. Someone had been here. I thought about packing up then and there, but I told myself maybe it was a hunter passing through. Maybe they saw my camp and decided not to bother me. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been watched, that someone had come back. So I made myself busy, kept the fire going all day, made noise. I whistled, I chopped wood. I acted like I didn't care. That night, I kept a fire going until the wood ran low. I sat close to the flames and kept my back to a tree. I didn't want to sleep, but I dozed off at some point, chin on my chest. I woke up maybe an hour later. The fire had died down to embers. It was completely dark, and the hair on my neck stood up. I couldn't explain why, but I felt it. Someone was nearby. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything, but I knew. That gut feeling, the old instinct we don't use much anymore. I stood up slowly, grabbed a stick from the fire pit, and poked at the coals until they flared back up. I didn't say anything. I didn't shout. I just acted like everything was fine. I moved around like I was just adjusting the fire, warming my hands, checking the tent flap. Then I turned suddenly and looked into the woods. I didn't see anything, but I left the fire burning brighter after that. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to leave. I didn't want to pack in a panic, though. I didn't want whoever it was, if they were watching, to know they'd rattled me. So I went about my routine. Boiled water, ate some oatmeal, folded my gear slowly, took down the tent like it was just another normal day. When I finally set off back toward the car, I kept my pace steady but quick. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see anything. The forest felt wrong. Not dangerous in a loud way, but in that quiet way that creeps up on you, like a held breath that never lets go. When I got to the car, everything was fine. No damage, nothing missing. I unlocked it, threw my pack in the back, and got in. As I turned the ignition, I glanced at the edge of the woods, just once. And there, in the trees about 30 yards in, was a man. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, wearing a dark jacket, jeans, boots, hands in his pockets, not smiling, not threatening, just watching. He didn't wave. He didn't move. I didn't stare. I put the car in gear and drove off without spinning the tires. I didn't look in the rear view. I just drove. Took hours before I felt calm again. Even then, I kept thinking if he wanted to hurt me, he could have. If he wanted to rob me, he had the perfect chance. But he didn't. He watched. He moved my stuff. He came back. And I'll never know why. Maybe he was testing me, seeing if I'd panic. Maybe he just liked the game. Or maybe I was the entertainment. Whatever it was, I played it right by not reacting. By acting like I didn't see him, like nothing was wrong. And maybe that's what kept me alive. I haven't been camping alone since then. I went camping last October, early in the month when the air starts turning but isn't freezing cold yet. It was a trip I'd planned just for myself, out in a state forest a couple of hours from where I live. The area was open for dispersed camping, and I wanted to get as far away from people as I could. I wasn't running from anything in particular, just burned out and looking to reset. It had been a stressful summer. The drive up was uneventful. I had a few spots marked on a paper map since cell service out there is a coin toss. I pulled off the main highway onto a gravel road that ran deeper into the woods. After about 45 minutes on that road and a few turns on narrow dirt trails, I parked in a clearing just wide enough for one vehicle. There weren't any signs of others camping there. No beer cans, no fire pits, no tire ruts, so I figured I was alone. I packed light, just a tent, sleeping pad, stove, food, a change of clothes, and my bird guide and binoculars. Bird watching was something I'd started getting into recently. It made me pay attention to the world around me, helped me quiet down internally. I had a little notebook to mark species and behavior, that kind of thing. I set up about 50 yards from the trail in a spot that sloped gently toward a small creek. The area was mostly pine with some underbrush, and the ground was dry. Good visibility in all directions. After setting up camp and making a quick lunch, I wandered around for a bit with my binoculars, looking for movement in the canopy. I saw a few warblers, a hawk circling far overhead. It was peaceful. The breeze moved through the trees with that soft shushing sound that makes you feel like you're being cradled by the world. I started to feel more relaxed. That evening, I made a fire, cooked some pasta, and sat for a while listening to the forest settle. I stayed up until the sky turned black, then went into my tent and tried to sleep. I could hear small things rustling now and then, but nothing unusual, just nature doing its thing. The next morning, I woke up early. There was a light fog settled over the creek and the air had that damp chill to it. I made coffee, warmed up a breakfast bar, and set out with my binoculars again. I followed the creek downstream, moving slowly and quietly, trying to catch birds as they woke up. I was about a mile from camp when I heard a sound that didn't fit. A gunshot, not far, maybe a few hundred yards, muffled but close enough to feel like a punch in the chest. I froze. It wasn't hunting season for most things, and I didn't remember seeing any signs about hunting being allowed in this area. Still, it wasn't unheard of. I hoped whoever it was knew the rules or at least wasn't careless. I stayed still for a few minutes, waiting. No more shots came. I turned around and started heading back to camp, keeping my steps light. I didn't want to be mistaken for something I wasn't. I wore dull green and brown, nothing that stood out, which suddenly felt like a mistake. When I got back to camp, nothing was disturbed. My gear was still there, undisturbed. I made more coffee, sat near the fire ring, and kept my ears open. The forest was quieter than before. Birds that had been calling earlier were quiet now. I wrote in my notebook, pretending not to be rattled. It was about an hour later when I saw him. He came walking through the trees from the west, not on the trail, just moving in that direct, confident way people do when they know exactly where they are. He wore full camo, top to bottom, including a mesh mask pulled back over his head, rifle slung over one shoulder. He wasn't aiming it, but it was there. He was a big guy, thick arms, heavy boots, not young, probably mid-50s. He didn't say anything, just looked around and then at me. I nodded, that's all, just a little head tilt. He gave a slight nod back. I wanted to say something to fill the silence, to make it clear I wasn't a threat or a target. I didn't want to ask what he was doing there, because I didn't want to sound like I was accusing him of anything, but I didn't want to just sit there either, so I said the first thing I could think of. I asked where I might find some birds. That was it. Nothing more. Just a casual question, pretending that's all I cared about. Birds. I hoped he'd take the hint, that I was just a quiet guy out here doing a quiet thing and didn't want trouble. He looked at me for a moment, then nodded again and pointed with 2 fingers toward the southeast, into a patch of thick trees. Then he walked off, same direction he came from. Didn't look back. I didn't move for a long time after he disappeared. My heart was pounding, but I tried to act normal. I didn't want to pack in a panic or run, just in case he was watching from the trees. I told myself again and again that maybe he was just hunting. Maybe he didn't know this wasn't a hunting area. Maybe he was just passing through. But deep down, I didn't believe that. He hadn't seemed surprised to see me. He hadn't looked lost. He didn't seem like someone who cared much about boundaries. I stayed one more night, but I barely slept. I kept the fire small and dim, sat with my back to a tree, eyes moving across the dark. Every sound made me flinch. I had my knife close, but it felt like a toy. I wasn't a fighter. I wasn't even a very good camper. In the morning, I packed slowly, carefully, kept my ears open. Every snap of a twig made my stomach knot. I moved like I had all the time in the world, but inside I was panicking. I wanted to be calm. I needed to look calm. I was scared senseless, but I played it cool. The walk back to the car was the longest of my life. Every step, I felt eyes on me. I didn't see anyone, but I kept thinking about how well camouflage works in the woods, how easily someone could stand behind a tree and watch without being seen. When I reached the car, I got in fast and locked the doors. I sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel, listening. Nothing, just birds starting to sing again. I started the engine and backed out slowly. I didn't want to rush. I didn't want to show fear. As I pulled out onto the gravel road, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. I didn't see anyone, just trees and fog and the empty trail behind me. I kept driving. Nothing happened. He didn't come back. He didn't follow me. But the whole drive home, I kept thinking about that moment. The way he looked at me, the way he stood there, rifle on his shoulder, sizing me up. I was surprised it happened, surprised I stayed calm, and surprised nothing came of it. But I still think about how easily it could have gone the other way. I haven't been back to that area. I don't know if I ever will. I never thought I'd have to deal with something like this out in the woods. I've always liked camping, the quiet, the stars, the fresh air. But one night, deep in the forest, I found myself locked in a kind of standoff with something I hadn't expected: a hungry mountain lion. I was camping alone, about 15 miles into a forest reserve I'd never been to before. I had picked a spot near a small creek, where the trees were thick, but there was a flat clearing just big enough for my tent. It was late spring, the weather cool and crisp at night, and the air smelled like pine and wet earth. I spent the afternoon hiking, gathering some firewood, and setting up my camp carefully. I didn't want to attract bears or anything else, so I made sure to hang my food bag on a high branch, away from my sleeping area. I cooked a simple meal over the fire, some canned beans warmed up and a granola bar, and then settled into my sleeping bag as the sun disappeared behind the hills. Around 10 p.m., when the woods were completely dark except for the fire, I heard something moving out there. At first, it was just small rustles, leaves crunching, twigs snapping. But then I caught a low growl, soft but very clear. It was close. I froze, heart pounding. The stories I'd heard about mountain lions crossed my mind. They're usually shy, I told myself. They don't usually attack unless they feel threatened or desperate. Still, I didn't want to find out what desperate looked like. I stayed still, eyes wide, listening. The growling got louder and more urgent, mixed with a heavy breathing sound. Then I caught a glimpse of movement just past the firelight. A large, muscular shape creeping through the trees, eyes reflecting the flickering flames like two yellow moons. It was a mountain lion, no doubt. Bigger than I imagined, with a long tail and powerful legs. Its fur was tawny and blended perfectly with the shadows. I thought about what to do. I'd read that running was the worst option. They chase movement and speed. Staying calm was the best. Making myself look big. Making noise. But my mouth felt dry, and I was shaking so hard I thought I'd lose control. I slowly reached for my flashlight and clicked it on, aiming it at the animal. The sudden bright beam caught the mountain lion's eyes again, and it froze. I kept the light steady and slowly stood up. My hands trembled, but I tried to appear as large as possible. Arms raised, jacket open. I shouted, trying to sound as loud and threatening as I could. The fire crackled behind me, adding to the noise. For a moment, the mountain lion just stared, its body tense like it was deciding what to do. Then, it let out a low growl and took a few steps closer, crouching slightly like it was ready to pounce. I realized then that this wasn't a normal encounter. This animal was hungry and bold. It wasn't scared of me. I grabbed a sturdy stick from the ground and held it out in front like a spear. The mountain lion lunged suddenly, a blur of speed, but I swung the stick hard just as it leapt. The stick hit its head and made it pull back with a sharp hiss. That gave me a few seconds to back away toward my tent. I kept shouting and swinging, trying to look as fierce as I could. I scrambled into my tent, zipped the door fast, and grabbed my small camping knife from the pocket. The mountain lion sat just outside, pacing. I could hear its heavy breaths through the thin fabric. I stayed in the tent all night, barely daring to breathe. The mountain lion never left. Sometimes it would growl, sometimes it would pace, waiting. I knew it was dangerous, and I knew that if it got in, I wouldn't stand a chance. My mind raced with all the stories of people being attacked. How fast and strong these animals are, how silent and deadly. I thought about how to survive. I remembered that fire helps, so I kept the small fire burning outside, feeding it with dry wood I'd saved. The smoke and flames seemed to bother the animal, but it didn't leave. At one point, I realized I was running low on water and food. I hadn't packed enough for an unexpected night like this. As dawn approached, the mountain lion's behavior shifted. The growling softened. It sat back on its haunches, watching me but no longer aggressive. When the first light of morning spilled through the trees, I took my chance. Slowly, I unzipped the tent and shined the flashlight directly into the animal's eyes again. It blinked, startled by the sudden brightness. I grabbed my pack and slowly moved backward, not turning my back. The mountain lion watched me for a moment, then melted silently back into the trees like a shadow. I didn't stop moving until I reached my car, which was miles away at the trailhead. That experience changed me. I learned that being calm, prepared, and respectful of wild animals is the only way to survive moments like that. I packed better after that trip: bear spray, a whistle, and more food. I told no one about it for a while because it felt like admitting how close I'd come to real danger. Looking back, I realized how lucky I was. The mountain lion wasn't just curious. It was hungry and bold. In that moment, it could have ended badly. But staying still, making noise, showing I wasn't easy prey, and holding my ground saved me. Camping isn't just about peace and quiet in nature. Sometimes it's about facing raw survival and knowing what you can do when everything else feels like it's falling apart. I grew up in the city, but I always had a thing for the woods. The stillness, the quiet, the space to think. It all made sense to me in a way that crowded sidewalks and flashing signs never did. When I started hiking and camping on my own, it was like I'd found the part of me I didn't know was missing. I'd pack light, hike deep, and set up camp far away from any roads or other people. I liked that distance. I liked being alone. That said, I always took the wilderness seriously. I respected it. I read up on animal behavior, survival tips, terrain, weather, all of it. I carried what I needed and never messed around with risky shortcuts. But no matter how much you prepare, the woods have a way of humbling you. It was late October when I headed out for what was supposed to be a 2-night solo trip in the Sierra foothills. Not quite winter, but cold enough at night to keep most casual hikers away. I'd done that stretch before, not the exact trail, but the general area. I knew I was going to be in mountain lion territory. It was always a thought in the back of my mind, but I'd never seen one up close. This time I started out late in the day, made about 8 miles in before finding a small plateau near a half-frozen creek. There was no one around for miles. The sun was already sinking by the time I pitched my tent. I gathered some wood for a fire, cooked a hot meal, and settled in under the thick stars, feeling that familiar calm settle over me. The woods were quiet that night, too quiet. Not a single hoot from an owl, not even the wind in the branches. I'd been out enough times to know that silence like that wasn't normal. I told myself it was just the colder weather. Around 2 a.m., I woke up with this crawling feeling under my skin. My body just knew something was off. The fire had died down to glowing coals, and the inside of the tent was ice cold. I sat up in my sleeping bag and listened. That's when I heard it, soft, slow steps crunching lightly in the frost-covered leaves just beyond the tent. Not quick or panicked, not like a raccoon or a deer. It was methodical, quiet, heavy. It moved in a slow circle around the tent, not getting too close, just pacing the edge of the clearing. I didn't move at first. I just listened. My heart was already pounding. I reached slowly for the fixed-blade hunting knife I kept beside my sleeping pad and felt the familiar grip in my hand. I didn't want to unzip the tent. I didn't want to shine a light and provoke whatever was out there. So I waited, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other, barely breathing. After a while, the steps stopped. The woods fell back into that suffocating silence. But the sense of being watched didn't go away. I stayed like that until the first gray light of dawn started to show through the tent fabric. When I finally unzipped the door and stepped out, my boots crunching on frost, I saw the tracks. Big, clean prints in the dirt and frost around the clearing. Feline. The long pad, the absence of claw marks. Mountain lion. No question. I looked at the pattern. It had walked around the tent in a slow, deliberate path, paused a few feet from the entrance, and then veered off into the trees again. I didn't see it, but it saw me. My first instinct was to pack up and leave, but I knew better than to bolt. If the lion was watching from the trees, running would only wake up its instinct to chase. So I stayed calm. I went about my morning slowly, like normal, making noise with everything I did. I banged my metal mug against a rock, clanged my pot while boiling water for instant oats. I kept my eyes on the trees, never turning my back to the forest. After breakfast, I walked to a ridge about a quarter-mile from camp and looked around. The tracks led that way. The snow was thin on the ground, but enough to follow. I didn't go far, just enough to see that the trail led up into a dense patch of fir trees, dark and packed tight. I went back, broke down my tent, and packed up slow. I'd planned for another night, but the gut feeling I had told me not to push it. I didn't want to camp knowing that Cat might still be nearby. By 10 a.m., I was back on the trail. The forest was waking up again. I heard birds, squirrels. That helped, but I didn't let my guard down. I kept my knife in its sheath on my belt, bear spray on the other side, and a long hiking pole in my hand, just in case. The hike back was about 8 miles, mostly downhill, and I moved at a steady pace. I stopped every so often to scan the woods behind me, up in the trees to the sides. My head was on a swivel. Around the halfway point, I stopped to rest and drink water near a bend in the trail where the forest got thick and shadowed again. That's when I saw it. About 40 yards ahead, just off the trail to my right, a large shape moved between the trees. I froze. My heart skipped, then surged hard in my chest. It was the mountain lion. I knew it instantly. The way it moved, low and fluid like muscle wrapped in silence. It saw me, stopped and stared, eyes locked on mine. We both stood still. I raised my arms slowly, opened my jacket to look bigger. I held the hiking pole over my head and shouted, loud, deep, trying to sound more forceful than I felt. It didn't move. It didn't flinch. It just stood there, its tail twitching once or twice. Then I grabbed my metal water bottle and slammed it against a tree trunk. The clanging echoed down the ridge like a bell. The cat's ears twitched. I banged it again, harder this time. The mountain lion blinked, turned its head slightly, and then, without a sound, slipped back into the trees and was gone. I waited 5 full minutes before moving. I kept walking slowly but steadily.
No sudden moves.
I stayed alert all the way back to the trailhead, glancing over my shoulder, making sure I wasn't being followed. I made it back to my truck just after 2 p.m. I didn't feel relief until I'd started the engine and locked the doors. My hands were shaking, and I didn't realize how tight my chest had been until I exhaled and it actually hurt. I sat there for a while, just breathing, thinking. That encounter wasn't an attack. It wasn't a charge or a mauling, but it was close, too close. That mountain lion wasn't just passing by. It had watched me all night. It had followed my trail. Maybe it was curious, maybe hungry, maybe desperate, with winter coming and prey getting harder to find. I'll never know. What I do know is that every instinct, every bit of knowledge I had was tested in those moments. And they worked. I didn't panic. I made myself look big. I made noise. I stayed calm. I didn't run. The woods can be beautiful, but they're not tame. They're not safe just because we walk into them with gear and a plan. Predators don't care about your backpack or your phone or how many hikes you've done before. They care about instincts, theirs and yours. After that trip, I upgraded my gear. I started carrying 2 knives. I added an air horn. I practiced what to do in confrontations, how to stand, how to make noise, how to defend if it ever came to that. And I kept camping. I didn't let it scare me off, but I never forgot the way that mountain lion moved, how quiet it was, how close it came. It reminded me that every time I step into the woods, I'm not the top of the food chain. I respect that now more than ever. I never used to be scared of camping alone. It gave me something I couldn't get in town: silence. Not the kind of silence you get in your bedroom with the door shut, but the kind where even your own heartbeat feels like noise. I'd done dozens of solo trips, mostly in the Northwest, some up in Canada, and a couple way up north near Alaska. I never had any serious issues with wildlife, just a few deer sniffing near the tent or squirrels trying to get at my food bag. I was smart about it. I always hung my food. I never cooked near where I slept. I read the trail reports. I followed all the rules. But one trip last fall changed the way I feel about being alone out there. It was the closest I ever came to dying, and it was the only time I ever truly felt like I was being hunted. The trip was supposed to be a 4-day loop through a stretch of backcountry up in British Columbia. It was grizzly country, But that didn't bother me. I carried bear spray on my belt and a 10-inch knife on my hip. I knew how to make myself big for a black bear and how to lie still for a grizzly. I'd even read up on polar bears just for the hell of it, though I didn't plan on running into one unless I accidentally wandered 1,000 miles off course. I had my route mapped out, my pack trimmed down to a solid 35 pounds, and a weather window that looked stable. I parked at the trailhead before noon, locked up, and started in. The trail was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. No birdsong, no squirrels darting across the path. I told myself it was just the season. Early fall, animals were already changing their patterns. I pushed about 8 miles in the first day, climbing slowly along a ridge that dropped into a heavily wooded valley. That night, I set up camp on a flat ledge tucked above a shallow creek. I cooked on the rock face about 20 yards away from where I pitched my tent, strung my food bag in a tree off to the side, and settled in. Sometime in the night, I woke up. I don't know why. There was no sound that I could point to, just that prickling sense that something was off. I didn't unzip the tent or turn on my headlamp. I just lay there, eyes wide open, trying to listen past the pounding of my heart. Nothing. After 20 minutes or so, I finally drifted back to sleep. The next morning, everything looked normal. My food bag was untouched. No prints around the tent. I ate a quick breakfast, packed up, and moved on. The trail wound down into the valley, thick forest on both sides. About 2 miles in, I saw the first sign. Paw print. Big. Not fresh, maybe a day or two old. Grizzly. I crouched and looked at it. The claw marks were deep, the toes spread wide. I snapped a photo for later. As long as it wasn't fresh, it didn't concern me. But then I started noticing more. Scratches on tree bark, high up. Fresh dung off the trail that was still wet. A strong musk in the air that hadn't been there earlier. I started to feel watched. I told myself I was imagining it. I'd been alone too long. I needed to focus. I kept going. Mid-afternoon, I came to a small clearing where I decided to break for lunch. I was just unwrapping a protein bar when I heard it. A heavy snap, not a branch falling. Something stepped on it. I froze, waited. Another snap, then silence. I slowly scanned the woods. Nothing. I stood up, slowly, and held my bear spray in one hand, knife in the other. My mouth was dry. I waited 5 minutes, 10. Then, trying not to rush, I packed everything up and moved on. That night, I set camp a little earlier than planned. I found a spot with good visibility near a rock outcrop. Again, I cooked far from the tent. Again, I strung up my food. I didn't sleep much. Every sound felt too close. At one point, I swear I heard heavy breathing outside the tent. I laid there, stiff as a board, heart thumping, spray in one hand, knife in the other. I didn't move until daylight. That morning, I found tracks, big ones, a grizzly circling the tent. I followed them for a few feet before they veered off into the trees. I don't know how long it had stood there watching me. I considered turning back, but I was more than halfway through the loop. Going forward or back was the same distance. I chose forward. The third day was overcast. The wind had picked up, and leaves were swirling all over the trail. I was descending into another valley, this one narrower and more closed in. Around midday, I caught the smell again. Musky, thick, like a zoo. I stopped. The wind had shifted. The scent was strong. I looked around, scanning the trees. No sound, no movement, but something was off. I moved quicker now, trying to get through the valley before dusk. My pack seemed heavier. Every sound put me on edge. At one point, I thought I saw something move off to the left, but when I looked again, nothing. At dusk, I found a tight little clearing beside a shallow stream. I didn't eat. I didn't string up my food. I just lay down fully clothed with the spray in my grip and the knife resting on my chest. I didn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard something sniffing. Close. I held my breath. Then a low grunt, deep and wet. The flap of the tent moved. I didn't scream. I didn't breathe. I stayed dead still. After what felt like forever, the noises moved away. I waited another hour before I unzipped the tent and scanned the area with my headlamp. The trees stared back at me, I packed up in the dark and left. The last leg of the trail was about 8 miles. I did it non-stop. No breaks. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. My legs burned, but I didn't care. I just wanted out. Every time I turned a corner, I expected to see it standing there, blocking the trail. It never did. When I reached my car, I dropped my pack and sat on the hood for 20 minutes before I could start the engine. When I got home, I found 4 new claw marks on the backside of my tent. Deep ones, as if it had tested the fabric with one swipe. I haven't gone solo since. I still hike, I still camp, but always with someone else. And I carry more than spray now. That trip taught me that there's a difference between knowing what to do and being ready to do it. There are no ghosts in the woods, but there are things that will test your place in the food chain. That night I was prey, and I'll never forget how that felt. I'd been building up a collection of what I like to call creatively constructed informational phrases, little warnings, jokes, survival mottos I'd picked up from books, strangers, or my own experiences. Most of them sounded like they came from a grizzled guide or backwoods ranger, even though I made half of them up myself. Things like don't follow footprints that lead in but not out, or anything that moves like it knows more than you do, respect it or run. I'd never expected to actually need any of them. It was late October when I set out. A solo trip like most of mine were. I'd picked a secluded patch of woods near an old fire access road, several miles off the highway in a part of the state where the elevation dips into deep hollows and long ridgelines. It was cold already. Daytime in the 50s, nighttime flirting with frost. But that meant no bugs, no crowds, and no nonsense. I hiked in about 5 miles, carrying a heavy pack with 4 days of supplies. I wanted time away from everything, especially after a month of long shifts at work and too many people breathing down my neck. I'd found the place on satellite imagery, flat ground, some tree cover, and no trails cutting through it. I figured no one else would be out there. By the time I reached the spot I'd marked, the sun was low. I set up quick, tent, bear hang, fire ring. Everything went smooth. I ate a protein bar and a handful of nuts while watching the light disappear behind a wall of trees to the west. Cold started creeping in right after. I crawled into the sleeping bag without even lighting a fire. I didn't need it. The first night was fine. Just the usual distant rustling, breeze in the canopy, occasional snap of a branch. I didn't sleep great, but that's normal for the first night out. The ground was hard, and my shoulders ached from the pack. Around 3 a.m., I sat up for a piss and thought I heard something bigger moving down in the hollow. Too far to worry about. I went back to sleep. Next day, I explored. No trail, just compass and landmarks. Found a stream maybe a quarter mile east, ice cold and slow moving. Perfect spot to filter water. I marked it mentally and walked the perimeter of my camp zone. The woods were old, tall oaks and poplars, mixed with thick laurel patches. The forest floor was quiet. No signs of other people. It was perfect. That afternoon, I gathered wood. There were plenty of dead limbs and downed trees. I broke them down by hand, stacked them near the ring, and figured I'd have a fire that night. Around sunset, I heard movement down near the creek. Not big, maybe a deer. But again, I didn't investigate. Animals come with the territory. I built a small fire and boiled some rice and beans. Ate with gloves on. After dark, the woods thickened with silence. Not the kind where everything's asleep, but the kind where everything's waiting. Even the fire seemed to burn quieter. I stared into it too long. That's a bad habit. When I finally turned in, I left the fire to burn itself out and double-checked the food hang. Everything was fine. I woke up to the sound of fabric stretching. Not ripping, just that drawn-out tension, like a tight tarp pulled even tighter. Then I heard something brushing the side of the tent. Real gentle, just once, then quiet. I stayed still for a long time. My eyes were open, and my breath was shallow. I waited. No footsteps, no voices, no breathing. Just silence again. Eventually, I unzipped the bag and got my knife out of the pack. I kept it with me the rest of the night. Morning was gray. I stepped out and found something that didn't make sense. My bare hang was swaying slowly, like it had just been pushed. It was high up, well secured, and the trees weren't moving. The rope was intact, but there were scuff marks in the bark about 8 feet up, like something tried to reach it. I walked the area and didn't find tracks, but the soil was firm and covered in leaves, so that wasn't surprising. Still, the way the rope had tension in it made me nervous. I told myself maybe a raccoon climbed up and couldn't reach. That was all. But I didn't shake the feeling that something had been watching. The woods felt less neutral. Every sound seemed closer. Every stillness felt deliberate. That afternoon, I decided to hike further out toward the East Ridge. Wanted to see the view, maybe distract myself. I hiked hard for 2 hours, uphill most of the way. Got to a small clearing on a ridge where the trees thinned and the hills rolled out for miles. It was beautiful. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Across the ridge, maybe 200 yards off, a black spot on the ground. I pulled out my small binoculars and looked. It was a mound of fur, dead deer. Looked like it had been dragged there. No scavenger activity, no birds. Just splayed out, legs bent wrong, eyes open. The strange part was the way the ground was torn up in a line behind it, like it had been pulled a long way. I watched it for a while. Nothing moved. Back at camp, I kept the fire bigger that night. Didn't feel right to eat in the tent, so I forced myself to sit out, even though I kept looking over my shoulder every few seconds. That quiet was back, like everything in the woods had stopped to listen. Around midnight, I was still awake, fire mostly out. That's when I heard a noise I've never heard before. It was low, deep, and slow. Not a growl, not mechanical, just a long exhale, like something letting you know it was there. It came from beyond the creek, maybe 40 yards out. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. Then I heard a single step, something big. I backed into the tent and pulled the zipper down as quietly as I could. I didn't get in the bag, just crouched, knife out, headlamp off. I heard more movement, nothing fast, just slow, wide steps. It didn't come close, but it circled. At some point, I realized I was holding my breath. I stayed like that until dawn. When light broke, I moved fast, took down camp in record time. Didn't eat, didn't clean, just packed and left. On the hike back, I felt it again, that pressure, like I wasn't alone. I didn't stop for water, didn't look back. A mile before I reached the road, I found something else. A pile of stones stacked in the middle of the trail, perfectly balanced, 5 high. I hadn't seen them on the way in. They weren't from any park service. No trail marker, just there. Center of the path like a marker, or a message. I stepped around it and kept moving. When I finally got to the truck, I slammed the door, locked it, and sat with the engine off. I waited just to be sure I wasn't being followed. Then I drove. Back home, I unpacked, took a long shower, and sat for hours just thinking. There was no single moment that confirmed anything. No eyes, no clear danger. But everything pointed to the same thing. I wasn't alone, and whatever was out there wasn't just passing through. It was deliberate, quiet, capable. One of my dumb sayings came to mind then. If it's too quiet, it's not because you're alone. It's because you're not supposed to hear what's coming. That one used to make me laugh. Now it doesn't. I haven't gone back to that area. I still camp, still go solo sometimes, but I keep things closer to the road now. I keep my head on a swivel, and I never ignore the feeling when the woods go quiet. That trip changed something, not just in how I camp, but in how I think. Now, when I add to that list of phrases, I don't just write them for fun. I write them like they're warnings I might actually need.